Welcome to the Everyday Engineer. Today we're going to be insulating and drywalling this garage. Now first things first, what you want to do is make sure you got everything pre-insulation, pre-drywall done, such as your electrical and plumbing. I don't have any plumbing I need to do in this garage. I'm not going to have a basin sink or anything like that. But I have made sure all my electrical is, for the most part, done. I know where my wires are going to be going, so I'm going to hold off on doing the insulation in those portions for the time being until those wires get run. If you're doing this not in a garage with no heating, like I am in the middle of winter, then you might not be on such a timeline to get the insulation up, so you aren't running a little space heater to to try to keep it warm. So that's what I'm going to be doing. First things first, I have to get that down. I already removed a bit of the clutter on top of it from the previous homeowners. So it's bolted down, well, not bolted, but screwed down. So I'm going to go up there and start taking it down. I removed the storage. It took me a little bit of time, but eventually got those stripped screws out of there. And I measured the vertical distance between the studs. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up one of those insulation rolls. Now the type of insulation I've got is R13. So R13 is what the insulation is rated at. Now its rating tells you how essentially efficient the insulation is. But there's also batted insulation, which is what that is, and then batted faced, batted dual faced, batted unfaced. There's a whole bunch, and we're going to take a quick break to explain all of that with this engineering break. So there's three types of insulation. There's roll, aka batted, which is what you've seen me use throughout this video so far. There's spray foam, which is what you'll see people dressed in white hazmat type suits spraying out of a gun. Then there's also blow-in insulation. Those are the three most common you'll see. There's a few others, but those are the three most common. The roller batted is most commonly used by do-it-yourself in most homes. You'll see contractors though tend to go for the spray-in because it's a lot easier to do. You just spray the wall, it expands to fit. You don't have to worry about cutting it. It's a lot quicker, but you also have to worry about a lot of cleanup and then cutting the joints flush so that the drywall goes on. It's kind of a hassle. And then the blow-in is more so meant for attics or finished spaces. So you've already got the drywall up, you just cut a hole in the drywall, and then you spray it through. The batted, I mentioned that there was faced and unfaced. So the face and unfaced means that there's a vapor barrier on it. And that vapor barrier is a water-resistant membrane. On the one I was using, it's paper. There's also unfaced, which can be used by itself depending on your climate, or there's unfaced, which you use with a plastic vapor barrier, which staples to the walls. And depending on your climate as well, you know, which is more humid, the inside or the outside where you live, you'll want to place that vapor barrier either on the inside or the outside. In my climate, in my region, I use a paper barrier and it's facing inside. So that's why I'm doing the garage. It's facing the living area, as you would say. Now, the insulation I picked up has a rating of R13. So what does R13 mean? It essentially boils down to what its thermal resistance is. Its ability to resist heat change or cold change. That temperature resistance is what gives it that number. And the batting insulation, that R value changes depending on how much you compress it, because the material doesn't give it all of its thermal resistance. It relies on air pockets sitting within that cushion, that pink foam cushion. So if you compress that, and you compress it as hard as you can, that R13 might turn into an R10 or an R9. So it's not going to be constant. With spray foam, it's a lot more consistent, and blow-in is the same way. It relies on small little air pockets because air is inherently non-conductive compared to certain materials like metal. So depending on your application, it might make more sense to go with a spray foam if you're in a colder climate and you've got the ability to spend more money and upgrade to that system. But if you don't have that spare capital, then batting insulation works just as well. And then you just pick the R value for you. R13 works perfectly for the climate that I'm in. So hopefully that helps you learn a little bit about insulation. So back to the rest of the video. So hopefully that cleared a little bit up about insulation. So R13, because we're using 2x4 studs in this house instead of 2x6s, we're using R13. If you have 2x6, you could go thicker on the insulation. And you can even do a double wall if you want more insulation for better heat or sound properties. And there's a whole bunch of tables online that tell you, you know, those sound and thermal properties. But I'm only doing a single wall with R13 and a single piece of drywall. I may end up doing a second piece of drywall just because of the way that the floor sits. I don't really like it because it is a weird setup. As you can see, I'll bring you a little bit closer over here. It's vertical stud that leads to the footer, but then that footer sits on what looks like, I think, a 2x6. That 2x6 sits on some concrete block. So that first drywall is going to end right here. And then I'm going to have some 2x6 overhang, unless I do some bulkheads. And I'm not sure I'm going to really like the look of that. But we'll see once we get there. That's going to be the fluid part of this plan. But for right now, we're going to start cutting that drywall, or the insulation. So 92.5 inches is the vertical gap. Some things you want for this: good utility knife, box cutter, something sharp. I like having something with razor blades in it. That way I can change out the blade real quick when I'm doing stuff like this, because cutting drywall or cutting insulation and all that stuff will dull out the blade pretty quick, and then you have to sharpen it if it's like a pocket knife or something like that. So these are just real nice in a pinch. Also, I'm wearing some latex-free nitrile gloves. This helps because insulation will make you itchy for days. Well, maybe not days, like a few hours, but still. I'm also wearing long sleeves. And I'm going to put this up and just expose as little skin as I can. I'm also going to go grab a face covering real quick. That way I'm not breathing any of this in, because essentially it's fiberglass particles that are going to get in the air, and then they get in your lungs, and then you're coughing up a storm, and it's just not a pleasant or healthy experience. So precaution. Safety glasses are nice, helps prevent them from getting in your eyes, but I have to kind of say safety glasses I don't think are really necessary, because if they're floating in the air, it prevents direct. But if you're wearing them like this, and you got a pretty big gap right there that they'll get into anyway. So let me go grab a face covering real quick, and I'll be right back. Now, while square cuts aren't all that important, I still use a speed square just to get a nicer line. It just makes the next cut a little bit easier. You don't have to. You can eyeball it, just measure, mark. You could measure, mark on both sides, and just connect the line. And that'll work too. But it's just the way I like to do it. So what you want to do is you want to measure from this end, the height of the gap, minus 92.5. I'm going to cut to 92 and a hair shorter than 92.5, because mine's actually like 92 and I think it's like 7/16. So I'm going to cut to that dimension. You can always compress it a little bit, so don't cut it shorter than it needs to be, because then you get little air gaps and that lets cold and heat in, and it's essentially not as efficient. You're not going to get 100% efficiency with this, but the closer you get, hey, the more money you save on your electricity or heat bill. Make a cut. It'll look like that. The paper should still be attached. Sharper your knife, the less times you'll have to go across that cut line. But a little bit of. Now what I like to do, I like to come from the bottom and just start the cut. And it's sort of pleated on one end. Watch your fingers. Just gotta. So it's pleated on that side, right there. So it's a little harder to cut through. So now we've got this. Let's hang it up. I like to use a ladder. That way I can get all the way up to the top of the stud, or the ceiling. Press it in and just keep pressing it as it goes down. Now, these studs are real nice, but they're also bad because they're not 16 on center. They're like 15 and a half to 16. So somewhere in that range, which means that they compress the insulation real well, so I don't need to staple it. Like these are being held in there. Like I could pull on it and it won't come out because it's fully compressed in there. I also have some siding nails that are still coming through, so we're good on that end as well. So, got the insulation finished. I think it looks pretty good. Whole garage. Got the wiring done. Now, all that's left is the drywall and finish work. Got to replace some fixtures and whatnot, but that's the easy stuff. As long as you properly plan with your materials, you shouldn't have many cutoffs. This is my set of cutoffs.
And that's for a whole 2-car garage, and I'm happy with that. I had to do some combining over here, and just combine a few strips. Otherwise I would have had to buy a whole extra roll. That would have been a lot of waste. And I don't live in a very cold climate. It maybe gets below 0 Fahrenheit once or twice a year, so I'm not worried about the amount of insulation or thermal loss that I get from combining them like that. So next is drywall, and then the garage is ready for tools. Thanks for watching.